Problem of evil. Let me ask you first. How would you state the problem of evil? What is it? What is the problem of evil? How would you describe it? Anyone here or anyone in the online chat? Yes? Yeah, great. Okay, a form of the problem of evil is the source of evil. If God created the world good, where did evil come from? And so then the question becomes something like, was there something in Satan or something in Adam that was like a little seed of badness or something that God created? Even, I don't care, if you want to do something like, you can do this. If God knew the possibility that Satan or Adam would choose sin, why did he create the world with even the possibility of that? Okay, so try this. Let's say something like this, we're going to give you an opportunity. You can roll some dice. And if the numbers that you roll are the numbers 2 through 6, then I'll give you 1,000 pesos. Cool. But if the dice you roll is the number 1, someone will kill your family. Do you roll the dice? Yeah, well, no, the risk is not worth it, right? I set up the odds so that it's a 5 out of 6 chance that you get 1,000 pesos. But that 1 out of 6 chance that your family dies doesn't make it worth it, right? Okay. All right, so the logic of this goes, you can say, well, God created the world and he gave us a free will so that we can have a relationship with him. That's nice. Okay, but if there was even a possibility of all the horror that this planet has become, then the argument goes, God is he's taking risks it's like a bad gambler. He's taking risks with stuff he should not take, right? I mean, that's the argument. I don't agree with it, but that's the argument. He's risking the eternity, the eternal torment of millions of people. And so he rolls the dice. Sayang naman. They chose sin. And the result of that is millions of people end up in hell. Okay? So that's a problem. That's one expression of the problem of evil. Okay, what else? What do you think? Still thinking. What do you think? Oh, okay. We'll come back to that. Great. Expressions just of the problem of evil. The problem of evil itself. How about this as simple as this? You're in pain. Okay? You're in pain, you're suffering, you're hurting. There is a God in heaven who could do something about it. He could make the suffering stop. Right? And so the question goes, I can pray to him and I can ask God to make the suffering stop. Does that always work? And the answer is no. Sometimes the suffering continues. So does God not care about me? Is he not listening? Does he not care? He has the power to stop the pain. Why doesn't he stop the pain? Is this an expression of him being like, whatever, right? Does he take my pain seriously? Okay, all of those are a very thick expression of the problem of evil. What I'm giving here, I'll put this up, are 2 forms of the problem of evil. And the one is the existential or personal. So that's the one I just said. I'm hurting right now. Where is God? If he loves me, why won't he take away my pain? He does have the power to make it stop. Right? It's not that he's in heaven and he can't do anything. He can do something about it. So why doesn't he make it stop? And second is a more philosophical problem. A more philosophical problem of this goes, how can God, this is like the Trinity, 3 foundations. Number 1, how can God be all-powerful and good, but there is still evil? He's all powerful and he's good, but there is still evil. Okay? And philosophers have pointed out that there's no way for all three of those things to stand together. Because if he's all powerful, he can do anything that he wants to do. If he's good, then he does deeply care about us. He loves me more than I love myself. He cares about my well-being more than I could possibly care about my own well-being. But there is still evil. He is not absent. He does care. And he can stop it. Why doesn't he? That's the question. Okay? That's the philosophical expression of this. Other kind of subsidiary forms of this question, things like natural evil, earthquakes, and so forth. The reason this matters, or the reason I put this out separately, is if you do something like, okay, well, evil still exists because people sin. That's true. Okay, people sin, and that causes the sorrow. But we recognize sometimes, random things happen. There's a terrible earthquake. That's not because any person sinned per se. It's just an earthquake. It's completely impersonal. It's tectonic plates moving. And the tectonic plates moved at the wrong time in the wrong place. And a bunch of people died. Okay? So that kind of thing. Storms, even what's the point of an animal suffering? The animal, particularly a mammal or something, the animal's aware, it feels it, right? So what's the point of that animal feeling that? Where did evil originally come from? That was Camus' form of it. Why does a God allow excessive, pointless evil? Sometimes what I hear is something like, well, this suffering happened, but it allowed this good thing to happen. And that's sort of a defense we sometimes use. It's an okay defense, but there is sometimes suffering that just makes no sense. There's nothing good that comes out of it. And then to me, of all the expressions of the problem of evil, this last one is the sharpest. How can the majority of humanity end up in hell? Now, I don't actually know that for sure. I assume that greater than 50% of humanity will end up in hell, but I don't technically know that for a fact. Okay? But in any case, a not insignificant number of humans end up in hell. How is that? Anyway, I don't know. That is the hardest to me. That's the hardest expression of all. Okay. Common defenses that happen around this discussion. So here, I'll put them in list form. This is in your notes as well, in some form, but slightly differently organized. Number one, the greater good defense. And the greater good defense goes, well, there's some greater purpose that outweighs the suffering. And so this would be like, Joel Osteen? You know who that is? So Victoria Osteen is his co-pastor. They're technically the two pastors of that church in Houston. So I heard Victoria Osteen one time give a little sermonette thing, and she told a story where she faced suffering and the problem of evil. The problem of evil in the form of suffering she faced was that she lost her credit card. So she couldn't find her credit card, and she was really upset she couldn't find it. So she called the bank to tell them to cancel the credit card. And when she called, then the person said, "Give me your name, please." And she said, "Victoria Osteen." And the person said, "Are you like the Victoria Osteen?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And they had a conversation, and she was able to encourage the woman on the other end of the line. And so she got done with having that encouraging conversation. She hung up, and she picked up her purse, and her credit card fell out the bottom of her purse. And there it was. Okay. So the point of the story was sometimes frustrating, annoying things happen to us, but God had a plan because I got to talk to this person on the phone. Okay. Now, part of the reason I chose that as an illustration of this, I think that illustrates the fact that this particular defense works better if you're kind of in the center of the scale of suffering. In other words, if I draw a graph and this is the level of suffering that exists, okay? So this is this is you stubbed your toe, okay? It hurt, but you kind of move on, And this is the level of you lost your job, Okay, but this is the level of you were in the Holocaust. Okay, so if that's the scale of suffering. Well, I think the greater good defense, well, it worked out, but it was painful, but it was a good thing. That defense works okay, like around this level. I lost my job, but then I got a better job. You can almost even do it as this person died a tragic death, but people came to the funeral and they heard the gospel. You can almost do it like that, okay? The problem I have here, by the time you get up to the level of things like the Holocaust, you just can't come up with anything good. You just can't come up with anything good. Okay. So it is a defense, and I would say it's not even necessarily a wrong defense. There are some things in Scripture where we do see an idea like suffering happens, but ultimately God is glorified. So that's a biblical idea. But as far as this solving the problem of evil, it doesn't. It can't. Ultimately, actually, it runs the risk of implying that God is ambivalent about sin and evil, meaning an idea something like God's in heaven, and he says, okay, I'll let the world rebel and blow up, and people will end up in hell because it'll glorify me. That's great. That's the risk that this defense runs. Okay. And so while there is an idea, a biblical idea, that God, careful, allows things to happen on earth that are bad, he allows them, and they ultimately result in his glory, we want to be very careful to maintain God is not happy that the evil things happened. In other words, I would prefer something like this. Our God is a God who makes beautiful things out of awful things. Great. God takes terrible things like Joseph being sold into slavery, and he turns that into a beautiful thing that brings him honor. Fine, great, sign me up. Okay, but God causes sin, and he's good with that because it ends up bringing him glory. Not good, right? God allows it and turns it around to glorify himself. But God is never looking at the sin and saying, oh yeah, but this will bring me glory. No, right? Okay, so that would be the first. And my argument of that is to go, the greater good defense, it's okay, but it doesn't solve the problem of evil. It doesn't. So it's okay to say something like, well, God still brought himself glory through this situation. People heard the gospel at the funeral. Okay, that's fine. But not to view this as a complete solution to the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. Okay, solution or defense number 2, the free will defense. Free will defense goes, God created free agents with the ability to make real choices. And so if they're going to be able to choose to love God, they might also choose to reject him. So because God wanted to have a relationship with us, he gave us free will. Sayang naman, we chose sin. Okay. It's not a wrong idea in this sense. It's quite clear. Man is responsible for our own sin. God is never the reason for moral evil. So if I ask something like, where did sin come from? The proper answer is, we and Satan before us made a choice. Where did sin come from? We chose it. Where did sin come from? Satan preferred it. That's where sin came from. Okay. So that part of it is a valid point. On the other hand, the free will defense runs the danger of sounding like God is in heaven and he can't do anything about it, about our problems. In other words, the free will defense, if you take it out far enough, goes, well, during the Holocaust, God is in heaven, he's looking down, he's horrified at what's happening, but he says something like, well, they have a free will. I made a bad choice to give them a free will 6,000 years ago. Nothing I can do now, right? I can't stop them. When in fact, when you look at Scripture, you have a lot of places where God did intervene and stop human free will. Human free will. Where God did step in and say, okay, Pharaoh would think this, but I'm going to redirect his will. God can do that. Okay? God does have the ability to affect our choices. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He turns it like rivers of water. In other words, you think of a river, God holds a river in his hand, says, okay, it'll go that way now. I mean, that's how easy he turns the decisions of humans, right? Just pour it out that way. Okay, so yeah, we definitely don't want to do something like God can't do anything about it. And again, what I'm saying here is there's a biblical idea, but it doesn't solve the problem. Each one of these, there's a biblical idea, wala pang solution talaga. You're still dealing with the problem of evil. Okay, number 3 is, this is the most philosophical, abstruse. So I'll go fast on it. The idea is unreality of evil. The concept being evil is not actually a thing. Evil is the absence of something else. In science, we make this distinction sometimes. Cold does not exist. Cold is just the absence of heat. So heat is the reality. If you take away the heat, it's not like you can have a bottle of cold. It's just you take away the heat and you get cold, right? Or darkness is not a thing, as in you can have a bottle of darkness, pour it out somewhere. Light is the thing. But if you have no light, what we call that, we call it darkness. So darkness is not a thing, it's just the absence of light. Okay, the logic of this goes, evil is not a thing, it's just the absence of good. And so as a non-thing, when you say evil exists, you've actually messed up the discussion, because evil doesn't exist as a thing. Evil is just the absence of good, like kind of a hole in the fabric of metaphysics, a hole in the fabric of reality, but it's not really a thing in itself. Okay. Here my simple answer would be to say, to whatever extent you'll say evil is not real, I don't really care. It still hurts. I mean, so you're in the middle of deep sorrow. You're hurting, you're aching, and you're saying something like, I don't understand how life can be so painful. And someone comes to you and says, well, here, let me help you out. Actually, the pain you're feeling, it's not really a thing. It's just the absence of good. You're like, thank you. That helped. You know, no. In fact, the argument would go, if someone says to you, the pain you're feeling is just an illusion, it's not actually a thing, then my answer would go, well, for an illusion, this sure feels bad. This is one painful illusion. This illusion feels incredibly real. Okay. And Buddhism, by the way, just so you know, Buddhism is a form of this. Buddhism is proposing this. Evil is not really a thing. It's just an illusion. You're attached to the world. If you could get rid of desire, you would stop feeling pain. To which you're just saying, yeah, well, if this is unreal, it feels awfully real. It feels awfully real. Okay? So again, I don't think it solves the problem. One more, I'm sorry, maybe we're tired of hearing these. The best of all possible worlds. The idea goes, if you imagine God having a billion different worlds that he could have created. He looked through the billions of worlds he created, he could create, the possible worlds, and he chose the best one that could exist, and he created it. That's the one you live in. And so the idea is, yeah, this world hurts and it's messed up, but it's actually the best of the available options. Okay. My problem there is that you've basically limited God. You've limited what God is capable of doing. If I think of the new heavens and the new earth, God will create a new creation, and it will have no sin in it. So baka yun na lang, right? I mean, he could have just started with that. So I'm very unconvinced by the idea that this is the best of all possible, walang mas mabuting magawa, or something. That just doesn't work at all. Here's a great summary paragraph from D.A. Carson. After reading some neat theodicies, theodicy is a word for defense of God. Everything we just read, these are theodicies. After reading some neat defenses like that stress, say, that all suffering is the direct result of sin, or that free will understood as absolute power to contrary, that's a philosophical definition of free will, nicely exculpates God, nicely takes away his guilt. I wonder if their authors think Job or Habakkuk were twits. Surely they should have seen that there is no mystery to explain, simply gone home and enjoyed a good night's sleep. It is better to let the biblical texts speak in all their power. Many things can then be said about the God who has graciously disclosed himself. All of them leave God quite untamed. And so if you're looking at Habakkuk or Job, you're recognizing in these books, these books are probing difficult, deep questions of the problem of evil. We did not invent the problem of evil. The Bible is quite aware of it. Okay. But the answer that God gives in those passages is not, well, here's a cute little defense. Evil is actually not anything. It's just an illusion, right? The Bible doesn't deal with it that way. The way the Bible in Habakkuk and Job discusses the problem of evil basically takes the form of this. Yes, it's real. It hurts. It's painful. There is a God. You'll have to trust him. You'll have to wait. There is an answer, but you'll have to wait. So a couple of points then that come into this. I really liked, the reason I had you watch this video earlier, I really liked Keller's argument here. Some of our suffering is in the category of pain that we will awake from. And he made this comparison of like a teenager or a preteen struggling because her parents made her switch schools. Okay, so the illustration would go something like, you've got a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, and so she's in school, and she's made friends, and she likes her friends and everything like that. But the parents know that this school is not giving her a good education. And so at some point, the parents make a decision, the father takes on some extra work, and they eliminate some other things that they were doing, and they make some sacrifices to pay for her to go to a better school. And the girl says, yeah, but all my friends are at my old school. My parents hate me. My parents don't love me because they're making me go to a new school that I don't have any friends at. Right? And so from her standpoint as a 13-year-old, she doesn't see the big picture. They don't love me because they're making me go to a new school. And the reality is, no, actually, the choice they made was because they loved you. They're investing in your future. They're making significant sacrifices so that your life will be better. Okay. So something like that fits here. In other words, I don't view this as a complete solution. But I think I can make an argument that God does have purposes we are not capable of understanding, things that are beyond our brains. Okay. From my standpoint as the little mosquito still flying around here, or the little ant crawling along, from my standpoint as a limited thinker, some of these things don't make sense to me at all. Okay. But he has purposes that are bigger than that. Other things that really help me are going to go back to this framework. So I think the best way to have a discussion about the problem of evil is within the whole framework of the entire biblical story: creation, fall, redemption, restoration. So let me pause for a second, think about these 4 stages again. Creation, God created the world good. Fall, we chose to rebel against God, the result of which the world is broken. Redemption, Jesus enters into our suffering. Jesus takes on him our sin, suffers for it. And then restoration, God makes all things new. Okay, now let's take those 4 stages. Let's think about those in terms of the problem of evil. Good creation and the fall. One of the problems with Buddhism, one of the problems with any secular materialism, one of the problems with any of the other solutions to the problem of evil, they cannot answer why life is at the same time so good and yet so bad. Okay, so here, why do I have beautiful fruits that I enjoy? Bring us joy. Why is life so wonderful in so many ways, right? All the joys of family and relationships, and the fact that we enjoy good food and we enjoy good experiences, and you can climb up on a mountain and look out at the scenery. You can go to the ocean and swim in the ocean. You can put your head under the water and see the fish that God made. You can look up in the sky and you can see the stars he made. Life is beautiful. Life is wonderful. Life is fabulous. Life often hurts. Life is painful. It ends in death. People let you down. people disappoint you. You disappoint yourself. Every single day, you get to the end and you're exhausted. And you do that over and over again until eventually your body wears down and you die. Okay, everything I just said was true. But depending on the selection of information I chose, I can talk about life as wonderful and beautiful, or I can just turn right around and talk about life as painful and empty. And all of that's so. Why is the world at the same time so good and so bad? And I think the best answer you can find for that is God made the world good, our sin broke it. And so I find a world that is good because God made it richly and beautiful. And I find a world that is deeply broken because of our sin. And you see the effects of it all around us, our total failure. Okay, put those two together, it's quite significant. Okay, number 2, evil as the ongoing status of human life. What about this? Death is horrible. Aging is like a slow, painful grind on your way to death. And even things like weariness and sickness and, burying people that you love and all of these things, it's horrible, okay? But what if the length of our lives is designed to give us plenty of time to recognize the realities of suffering and pain and what will happen to us? In other words, nobody can say who lived into reasonable young adulthood, nobody can say, well, I didn't know I was going to die. Come on. How many people did you bury? How many funerals did you go to? And every funeral you went to was a reminder. I used to know that guy. I used to talk to that guy. We used to be able to interact. Now we can't. He's done. And it's a reminder, I will be in the box sooner or later. Every funeral is a reminder, I will be in the box. Okay. And so what if God has built the world so that I just have this constant reminder? And in fact, what it's supposed to do in me, it's supposed to create in me this angst, this struggle, this tension in my heart. Wait a minute. Why is life so good and so awful? Why is there life and there's death? What will happen to me when I die? What's going on in this strange planet I inhabit? Something's up. Something really weird is up. What's going on? And life start looking for some answers. Okay. What if God has created the world that way on purpose? In other words, my argument would go, if everything in our life was just comfortable and easy, would we really be desperate? If there was no suffering, death, pain, would we really look for answers? Or would we just not be like, it's okay? And so what if part of the sorrow and the suffering is a mercy of a God who is drawing us back to himself before it's too late? And he puts into the world enough, Ecclesiastes has this concept, enough prods. The words of the wise are like prods. They poke you. Ouch! He puts enough stuff like that into the planet that you start dealing with enough ouch that you start looking for answers. What if this is part of his mercy? Okay, I'm skipping a lot of ideas. I can put this, I think I have, but I'll look again, put this in the Dropbox. Okay, that would be stage 1 and stage 2. God created the world. We face suffering, and that might be part of his driving us back to him. How about stage 3? Stage 3, the most significant. God enters into our sufferings. God, in the person of his son, enters into our suffering. This also came up in the video I asked you to watch, the Keller video. So he said something like this. The question of why there is evil, I don't have a complete answer. I can't say there is evil because of this. Okay, so I can't tell you the answer, but I can tell you what it's not. The answer is not because God doesn't care. It's not because God doesn't care. God does care. One of the ways I know this is I see that he himself entered into our suffering. And so, however, I would criticize him to say something like, God, are you listening? Do you care? Do you see my suffering? Does it matter to you? The answer becomes, here's the ultimate proof. He chose to experience it, all of it. He carried our sorrows. So where we have Isaiah 53, he bore our sorrows. The concept is all of my sin and the accompanying suffering is laid on Jesus. When Jesus dies, you've missed it. You've missed it if you think something like the death of Jesus, okay, those nails, that really hurt. The crown, that really hurt. That's just like the surface of it. The horror of the cross is that Jesus, who is completely holy and pure from all eternity, becomes sinful. How sinful? Every sin that you've ever committed, all of it, put on him at one time. That times every human being on planet Earth. The billions of humanity, with all of their sins. How many sins do people commit in their lifetimes? Crazy number of sins across their lifetimes. Times the billions that are alive. But you're not done, because you've got to do every human that's ever lived in the history of the world. All of those guys, all together, all of that sin laid on Jesus, one person. And the result of all of that sin laid on Jesus at that moment is that God's wrath, like a lightning bolt, all of the judgment, if you want to think of billions of people's sorrow in hell for all eternity, that judgment concentrated in a single lightning bolt poured out on Jesus. Obviously, he is the only one that could have sustained that level of sorrow. He's the only one that could have received the lightning bolt of God's justice and wrath in that moment. Okay? If you ask me something like, what is the deepest, darkest expression of human suffering in the history of the world? That's it. It's the cry on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's all of the suffering of humanity poured out on him. With his stripes we are healed. Our guilt was laid on him. He became guilty for us. God hath made him to be sin for us who knew no sin. The just for the unjust. All of that language. All of it, it's like you can go out to the furthest corners of the universe, gather all of the suffering and the judgment and the pain that's the result of all the sin. You bring it all together and you lay it on him in one moment. That's what happened in the cross. All of the sorrow, all of the judgment, all of the sin in one moment on one person. Okay? And so one thing you absolutely cannot say is that God is blind to our suffering, that God doesn't appreciate my suffering, that God's not paying attention. The moment of the cross shows you how much he paid attention. He carried it. He carried my sorrows. That's how deep that is. And then finally, the grand conclusion, the fourth piece of the framework. So this framework, the fourth piece of the framework is that God will have victory over our sorrows. So the final piece is that the world is returned to its pre-fall state. The world is brought back to the way it always ought to have been, the way that God intended it to be. So the end of the story is that all of the sorrow is set aside. And now I read Revelation 21 and 22. God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more sorrow, nor death, nor pain. The former things are passed away. Behold, I make all things new. See, you get to the final moment of the story, and God has solved the problem of evil. In fact, the language or the concept of it would go, I don't have currently a solution to the problem of evil because I'm still living in these phases. Okay? So in the meantime, what we're looking at for right now is we're in a wait phase. Wait for a solution. But there will be a solution to the problem of evil when God restores things. There will be a solution. He will fix it. It's just you're waiting. You're waiting for that to happen. Okay. So when I put those pieces together, the Christian worldview, I don't have a simple solution to the problem of evil. Like, I can't give you a solution that won't make you struggle with it. If you think about it, as I think about it, the problem is still deep, and we still struggle with it. I won't solve the problem of evil for you, but I can say this: Christianity offers you a better solution than anything else you can find. Christianity gives you a richer and deeper solution. And that's because of one concept I should have given you earlier, but I skipped it. And that's just this. Maybe it's down here. No. Basic concept. The problem of evil is not just a Christian problem. It's a human problem. What I mean by that is this. I gave you a form or an expression of the problem of evil. How can there be a God who's all-powerful, a God who's good, and yet evil still exists? So the atheist throws that at you. I don't understand how you can have a God and you believe he's all-powerful and that he's good and that there's still evil, okay? That's just one way of framing the problem of evil. But guess what? The atheist also has a problem of evil. Everybody has a problem of evil. Everybody has a problem with evil. Now, the atheist form of it doesn't involve God because he doesn't have a God, obviously. The atheist form of it is that he can't even talk about evil. He doesn't even have a concept of evil. Because within his framework, you can't identify things as evil. And it works like this now. Within an atheist framework, stuff happens. It just happens. So one day, man number one walks up to man number two, pulls out a gun, shoots him dead. Man number two died. He's gone, okay? What just happened there? Survival of the fittest, right? What just happened there? One extremely complex set of chemical reactions, one chemical machine caused another very complex chemical machine to stop functioning. Yun lang. And so it's now just a matter of chemical machines are going to do what they're going to do, right? This guy, why did he kill the other guy? Because it was wrong? No. Apparently the wrong chemical reactions were happening in his brain. Too bad. Bad chemical reactions, that's all we can say, right? And in fact, if I went further with the evolutionary framework, survival of the fittest, I would have to call that murder not just neutral, nangyari lang. I would actually have to call it a good, because the survival of the fittest means the strongest go on and they succeed and they pass on their genes. That's how we got here, is the strong ones killing the weak ones. So if a strong one kills a weak one, it's just evolution doing its thing. It's actually a good, not a bad. Okay, when I put that framework together, that's a very significant problem of evil. The problem of how you can even talk about evil within a secular naturalistic framework. Okay? And so given that, my point is to say everybody has a problem of evil. But we have the best answer to it for now. The best answer to it for now in the biblical story, God created the world good. It's our sin that got us where we're at. But God, in the person of his Son, entered into our sorrow. And he will make all things new. You won't do better than that. Okay? All of us humans have to struggle with this, but this is the best solution you're going to find. So one other thing I did not finish with a problem of evil was this, just how to have discussions with people. Number one, practical ways, helping hurting believers. Do not use Romans 8:28. God works all things together for good. Just don't use it. So, your father unexpectedly died, but somebody hears the gospel at the funeral. That's not going to help that guy right then. So anyway, I would just say, just don't use it. It is scripture, but not every scripture is that the right time to use. It might not be the right time. Ecclesiastes 3 has a concept. For everything there is a season, a time under heaven for everything. Okay? That might not be the right time. Here would be a better way of processing this. Admit that you do not know the reasons God allowed their suffering. And so that's where you want to go. I don't understand either. I do know that there is a reason. I do know that God is in control of the world. I do know that there are no accidents. I don't understand the reason, but I do know God has a purpose. Okay, you can do that kind of thing. But recognizing that a lot of times we don't know, we don't understand. Pointing them to their union with Christ, here were passages, you can look at these, but here are passages that talk about our suffering in light of our connection to Christ. Christ also experienced and suffered. And so Hebrews 2 gives us this idea. He was made like unto his brethren in all respects, so that he can be a faithful high priest for them. And so a concept to point them to, there is nothing that you and I suffer on planet Earth that Jesus does not understand. Because Jesus went to the very depths of the deepest possible suffering. So Jesus understands, he has experienced your suffering. And sometimes our hearts jump out and say, well, he doesn't know the exact form of this because he never had a fill in the blank. You know, Jesus never had a cancer diagnosis, this kind of thing. Yes, but he experienced the deepest forms of suffering. Point them to the furthest hope. I mean, ultimately, our answer on planet Earth as we suffer is that we will someday be restored. So in our suffering, we have to turn our eyes to God will fix this world. And I hurt right now. Even so, Lord Jesus, quickly come. That kind of feeling. Please, Lord Jesus, quickly come. Okay, one other thing I put on here, or did not put on here that I should have. Just a practical piece of advice. Listen. When a person is facing deep suffering, be prepared to just listen. Let them talk. And they need to be talking like, 80% of the time and you like 20% of the time. Just the best thing is maybe ask a few questions, but just be an ear. Just be there to listen to them and let them talk. Okay? But you don't need to preach to them. Don't preach to them. Just listen. Practical ways to discuss the problem of evil with unbelievers. If somebody's challenging you on the problem of evil, ask them questions. I believe in this deeply. In other words, what's going on here is they are kind of going after you because they think that you have a problem of evil. So this is you, this is them. They think that you have a problem of evil because you believe in God. So they're throwing missiles at you and throwing bombs at you. Everything is going this direction. What's your answer to this? What's your answer to that? They're dropping all these bombs at you, okay? My advice, go ahead and return the favor. And I don't mean attacking, but return the favor in the form of questions. So questions that you would ask back in return, well, what is your view of evil? What do you think evil is? What makes something evil? Okay, and depending on their answer, then you're asking a follow-up question. How can you believe in that if this, if that? Or what do you think the solution is? Is there any hope for dealing with evil? Because I have discussions like this with all kinds of different people. People who will be atheistic or secularist, but they're very upset about how unfair the world is. It's so wrong that the world is like this. It should not be this way. And where the conversation kind of goes, how can you use words like should, or it ought to be, or it's wrong? Who's the lawgiver? What makes for a should? Why do you just assume that there's a right and a wrong? The question goes off in that kind of direction. In the case of a Buddhist, there is no solution to evil. Evil just exists. Okay? That's deeply frustrating and leaves you deeply alone. There's no solution for this. So a Buddhist who went on complaining a long time about injustice, my question, what do you think the solution is? And he kind of just looks at me. I don't know, he says. He doesn't have a solution. Okay? My solution is Jesus entered our suffering to restore the world and change the way the world works. Hindi dapat ganun. Jesus did come to change the world. Be ready to agree and even appeal to their implied hunger for justice. So this guy who's talking for a long time with me about the world's so unfair, the world's unfair. I just went with it. Yeah, the world is it's so messed up. And I told him a couple of stories about how the world was messed up. Yeah, I agree. Then here's where, what do you think is the solution? Right? That's where you're turning. But how are we going to see this changed? What is the answer? And then finally, go to the biblical story, especially the concepts I talked about earlier, God entering our suffering at the cross and bringing hope to the transformed world. Those kinds of concepts are going to be very critical and very, I think, make a big difference for making them think through this. Okay, that's it that I will do with the problem of evil. Any questions there?